He humiliated me in front of everyone. My colleagues, the shareholders, even the janitor standing by the door. But what he didn't know was, the truth that would destroy him was sitting quietly in my laptop. The boardroom was suffocating that morning. The air smelled like burnt coffee and tension. My boss, Mr. Langford, stood at the center of the polished oak table, his expensive suit reflecting the cold fluorescent lights. "Hadley," he said, his tone slicing through the silence. "Effective immediately, your employment is terminated. You've embarrassed this company enough." I remember the gasps, the whispers, the cameras clicking. My hands trembled as I stared at him, the man I'd once trusted, the man who'd promised to mentor me. I wanted to speak, to fight back, but my throat closed, my vision blurred. All I could do was watch as he smirked, confident he'd erased me. What he didn't know was that he'd just started the worst office revenge of his life. When I think back to that morning before everything fell apart, it almost feels like a different life. The sun was barely rising when I left my apartment, the one-bedroom flat I'd worked 3 years to afford. The smell of fresh coffee filled my kitchen, and my cat, Milo, brushed against my legs, purring softly. I remember humming to myself, wearing my favorite navy blazer, the one I always wore when I needed confidence. I didn't know it would be the last day I walked into that office as a proud employee. At Langford Dynamics, I was known as the numbers girl. I managed investor relations, long hours, endless reports, but I loved it. It gave me purpose. I wasn't the loudest person in the room, but my results spoke for me. The company had grown 30% under my portfolio management. People respected me, or at least I thought they did. Mr. Langford, our CEO, had once told me I was his secret weapon. He said I had intuition most analysts lacked, the ability to see patterns before they formed. And maybe that's why the betrayal cut so deep. Because when a mentor becomes your enemy, it doesn't just hurt your career. It crushes your sense of trust. That week, something had shifted. The office atmosphere was different, colder. Conversations stopped when I walked by. My team, once friendly, now exchanged glances I couldn't decipher. I shrugged it off at first. Maybe it was just stress. We were preparing for the annual shareholders meeting. But the silence grew heavier each day. Then came the small things. Files missing from my drive. Financial projections, accidentally deleted. Emails forwarded to people who shouldn't have seen them. When I confronted our IT manager, he said there was no trace of tampering. I started to doubt myself. Maybe I was just overthinking. Maybe I was tired. But deep down, something told me this was deliberate. Someone wanted me gone. On Wednesday night, I stayed late as usual. The office was empty except for the soft hum of the servers. I opened my laptop to finalize the quarterly presentation, the one Mr. Langford had personally asked me to prepare. As I clicked through the slides, my stomach dropped. The numbers were wrong, massively wrong. Instead of a 12% gain, it showed a 9% loss. My data had been altered. I checked the version history. Someone had accessed my document an hour before. The user, admin. My heart raced. Only 2 people had admin access, the IT director and Mr. Langford himself. I tried to breathe, telling myself there had to be an explanation. But then, an email popped up from his assistant. Reminder. You're scheduled to present the financial summary tomorrow at 9 a.m. Mr. Langford requested you be there early. Something inside me twisted. He wanted me to present those false numbers. He wanted me to take the fall. I didn't sleep that night. I kept replaying every interaction we'd had, every smile that now felt like a lie. I even typed out a resignation letter but deleted it. No, not yet. I wasn't going to walk away like a coward. The next morning, as I arrived at the office, the tension was suffocating. People avoided eye contact. I caught snippets of whispers. She's in trouble. Did you hear about the report? I clutched my coffee cup tighter, forcing myself to breathe. When I passed Mr. Langford's office, he was on a call. His voice was calm, almost amused. Yes, he said, glancing at me through the glass wall. Everything will be handled. Handled. That word burned in my chest. I walked to my desk, opened my laptop and took a deep breath. If he thought he could destroy me so easily, he was wrong. I didn't know how yet, but I knew this wasn't the end. I wasn't just going to survive this. I was going to make sure the truth came out, no matter what it cost me. And when it did, it wouldn't just be justice. It would be office revenge, quiet, precise, and unforgettable. The next morning felt like walking into a battlefield. The air inside the office was thick with tension and gossip, and I could feel the stairs crawling up my back as I walked toward the conference room. My heart pounded against my ribs like a drum. Steady, loud, impossible to ignore. The shareholders' meeting was about to start. It was supposed to be a celebration. The company had just landed a multimillion-dollar partnership. But instead, the mood was somber, anticipatory, like everyone knew something I didn't. I set up my laptop and double-checked my slides again. I had spent the entire night restoring the original data, verifying every figure. Everything was accurate now, or so I thought. When Mr. Langford entered, the entire room went silent. He wore that same confident grin that once inspired loyalty. Now it only made my skin crawl. He nodded at me and said, "Ready, Hadley?" "Yes," I replied, forcing a calmness I didn't feel. He gestured for me to begin. I clicked to the first slide and started speaking, my voice trembling slightly. As you can see, the third quarter has shown a steady 12% growth, primarily due to. The screen suddenly glitched. Numbers flashed, then shifted. The graphs changed right in front of my eyes. Instead of growth, it now displayed a 9% decline just like before. Gasps filled the room. I froze, staring in horror. Mr. Langford turned toward me, eyebrows raised in feigned shock. "Hadley, what's the meaning of this?" I don't know," I stammered. "This isn't the data I uploaded. Are you saying someone else tampered with it?" His tone dripped with disbelief. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks. My mouth opened, but no words came out. The board members exchanged uneasy glances. One of them, Mr. Davis, muttered, "This is unacceptable." Langford sighed dramatically and placed a hand on my shoulder. "I'm sorry, everyone. This was clearly a mistake in judgment. Hadley has been under a lot of pressure lately. Let's not be too harsh." He smiled, that smug, rehearsed smile, and whispered just loud enough for me to hear, "You should have quit when you had the chance." The humiliation was unbearable. Every eye in that room burned into me. I felt like I couldn't breathe. My throat ached from holding back tears. After the meeting, I was summoned to his office. He sat behind his mahogany desk, typing something on his laptop when I entered. Without looking up, he said, "You embarrassed this company in front of every major investor. Do you realize what you've done?" "Those numbers were altered," I said, my voice trembling but firm. "Someone changed them and you know it." He leaned back in his chair, finally meeting my gaze. "Careful, Hadley. Accusing your CEO of something that's serious. That's career suicide." "Then why did the admin log show your name?" I fired back. His smile faltered for a fraction of a second before he chuckled. "You think you can outsmart me with your little spreadsheets? You've always been naive. Smart but naive." "I'll prove it," I whispered. "Good luck," he said, his tone almost amused. "Because as of now, you're suspended. Effective immediately." My heart stopped. "You can't." "I just did," he interrupted. "Security will escort you out." The next few minutes felt like a blur. The sound of my heels echoed across the marble floor as 2 guards walked me out of the building. My coworkers avoided my eyes. Some even looked relieved. When the glass doors closed behind me, I stood on the sidewalk in silence. The city moved around me. Cars honking, people rushing by, but I felt frozen. Everything I had built, every late night, every piece of loyalty I'd given gone. But as the initial shock faded, something inside me shifted. The fear turned into anger. The humiliation turned into resolve. I knew I had been set up. And I knew why. Langford needed a scapegoat to hide something far bigger. He thought he'd buried me. But he had no idea that I still had a copy of the real data saved on my cloud drive. The one that could expose everything. That's when I realized, this wasn't just personal anymore. It was corruption. And I wasn't going to let him get away with it. That night, sitting alone in my apartment, I stared at my reflection in the dark window and whispered to myself, if he wants a war, I'll give him one. The beginning of my office revenge had just begun. That night, I didn't turn on the lights when I came home. The apartment felt foreign, quiet, heavy, and suffocating. I kicked off my shoes, dropped my purse on the floor, and sank onto the couch. My body felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Milo, my cat, jumped onto my lap, meowing softly as if he sensed something was wrong. I ran my fingers through his fur, but my hands were shaking. It was over. Everything I'd built gone in a single morning. I could still see their faces, the way they stared at me during the meeting. Pity, judgment. Some even smiled. I'd been turned into a spectacle, the failed employee, the woman who cracked under pressure. And the worst part was that Langford orchestrated every bit of it. I pressed my palms against my eyes, trying to stop the tears, but they came anyway. Hot, relentless, uncontrollable. Why? I whispered to the empty room. Why me? I'd worked so hard to prove myself in a place that had never really seen me. As a woman in finance, I was constantly overlooked, dismissed, told to smile more, talk less. But I endured it because I believed hard work spoke louder than politics. Turns out, in that office, politics screamed. Hours passed and I just sat there, staring into the dark. The city lights glowed faintly through the blinds, casting stripes across my face. My phone buzzed several times, messages from coworkers I thought were friends. I'm sorry, Hadley. This isn't fair. You'll find something better, don't worry. You shouldn't have gone against him. That last one stung the most. I tossed my phone aside and went to the kitchen. The smell of stale coffee lingered from that morning, the last normal morning I'd had. I poured a glass of water, my reflection trembling in the sink's metal surface. My mascara was smudged, my eyes red, and I barely recognized the woman staring back at me. Maybe he's right, I muttered. Maybe I am naive. I sat at the table, scrolling through my email on autopilot, when I noticed something strange, a forwarded message from Langford's assistant. It was sent minutes before the shareholders' meeting. Attached was a confidential report I'd never seen before. Quarterly forecast revised. I opened it. The projections were falsified. Massively inflated revenue streams, fake vendor contracts, manipulated graphs. It wasn't just my presentation that had been changed. Langford had been lying to the board for months. My pulse quickened. This wasn't incompetence. It was fraud. I grabbed my laptop, heart racing. I searched through my cloud backups and found the original data I'd worked on untouched, time-stamped, and traceable. I compared it with the document he used. The discrepancies were undeniable. That's when the pieces started to fit. He'd needed a scapegoat, someone to blame when the truth eventually came out. And I was perfect, loyal, hardworking, and naive enough to trust him. My anger started to burn through the exhaustion. I stood up, pacing. He used me, I whispered. He set me up to take the fall. I slammed my hand against the counter, the sound echoing through the apartment. For the first time that night, I didn't feel like crying. I felt alive, furious but focused. The fog of despair lifted just enough for me to see what had to be done. But before I could plan anything, I broke again. The reality of it all crashed down like a wave, the humiliation, the betrayal, the injustice. I collapsed onto the floor, hugging my knees, shaking uncontrollably. I had never felt so small, so powerless. I whispered to the darkness. I gave him everything. My time, my trust, my loyalty, and he destroyed me. The only sound was Milo's quiet purring. Somehow, that small noise kept me anchored to reality. After what felt like hours, I stood up, wiped my tears, and took a deep breath. My reflection in the window looked different now, not broken but burning. There was something in my eyes I hadn't seen before, resolve. Langford thought he had ended me, but what he really did was awaken someone who had nothing left to lose. And a woman with nothing left to lose is the most dangerous kind of enemy. That night, before going to bed, I whispered one last promise to myself. Tomorrow, I start planning my office revenge. I woke up the next morning with the kind of clarity that only comes after complete devastation. My eyes were swollen, my voice hoarse, but my mind was razor sharp. The storm inside me had quieted, replaced by something colder, calmer, more deliberate. For the first time in days, I made breakfast. Toast, eggs, and a strong cup of black coffee. The smell filled the kitchen, grounding me. As I took my first sip, I whispered to myself, "You're not his victim anymore." Then I opened my laptop. The first thing I did was back up everything. Every email, every report, every financial document I'd ever worked on. I organized them by date, cross-checked versions, and compared signatures. I spent hours building a digital trail. Something undeniable. Something that would expose Langford's lies. I wasn't just angry anymore. I was strategic. Langford had always underestimated me. He saw me as quiet, obedient, predictable. That was his mistake. I wasn't going to shout my innocence or beg for mercy. I was going to dismantle his empire from the inside, silently, methodically. By noon I had a plan. Step 1. Gather evidence of financial misconduct. Step 2. Track every unauthorized edit to the company's internal files. Step 3. Find allies, but only the ones who had nothing left to lose. I started with my former colleague, Evan. He used to work in auditing before Langford transferred him to another department. I remembered how he once hinted that some numbers didn't add up. Maybe he'd seen something. I texted him, "Evan, I know what Langford did. I have proof. Can we talk?" He replied 15 minutes later. "Meet me at the Lantern Cafe, 3 p.m. Don't tell anyone." When I arrived, Evan was already there, hunched over his laptop, nervously stirring his coffee. He looked up, eyes darting around. "Hadley," he whispered, "you shouldn't be here. Langford's people are watching everyone." I leaned closer. "He framed me, Evan. And I know he's been cooking the numbers." He sighed. "You're right. I found discrepancies months ago. Ghost accounts, fake vendor invoices. When I reported it, he told me to adjust the data and shut up. 2 weeks later, I was reassigned. Can you prove it?" I asked. He nodded slowly. "Yes, but if I go public, he'll destroy me." "He already tried to destroy me," I said, voice steady. "But I'm still standing. And if we do this right, he won't be able to touch us." Evan hesitated, then slid a USB drive across the table. "Everything's on here. Just be careful." I wrapped my fingers around it, feeling the weight of what it meant. "I will." That night back home I pieced everything together, my data, his reports, Evan's files. The picture that emerged was staggering. Millions of dollars laundered through shell companies, falsified quarterly earnings, manipulated shareholder documents. Langford wasn't just corrupt. He was criminal. And I had the proof. But evidence wasn't enough. I needed timing, the perfect moment when exposure would do the most damage. That's when I remembered. Next month, Langford was hosting the annual Investors Gala, a media-covered event meant to celebrate transparency and growth. The irony almost made me laugh. I decided that would be his stage of downfall. In the weeks that followed, I rebuilt myself piece by piece. I joined yoga classes not for peace but to learn control, to mask my anger under calmness. I practiced my tone in front of the mirror, learned to smile again, even when every part of me was plotting. I reached out to a journalist I once met at a conference, Rachel Kim, an investigative reporter known for exposing corporate scandals. I sent her an anonymous email with a teaser file and one line. "You'll want to look into Langford dynamics. The numbers don't lie." Her reply came the next morning. "Meet me. I'll bring protection." The plan was in motion. By the time the gala approached, I was ready. My outfit was elegant, my demeanor calm, but beneath that surface was fire. Every move I made was calculated. Every smile rehearsed. I knew Langford thought he'd buried me under shame. But what he didn't realize was, I'd been digging my way out, and soon I'd be standing over the ruins of everything he'd built. As I looked at my reflection one last time before the event, I whispered, "This isn't just revenge. This is justice. And it's going to be office revenge he'll never forget." The gala smelled like champagne and cheap perfume. 1,000 conversations folded into one glimmering room. Crystal chandeliers scattered light across the marble floor. Cameras flashed like distant thunder. Langford moved through the crowd like a king, the scent of his aftershave lingering in the air, as if he could buy respect with a bottle of cologne. I sat at a table near the back, wearing a dress that felt like armor. Under the table, my fingers curled around Evan's USB drive, the metal cool and unassuming, the weight of evidence disguised as a trinket. Beside me, Rachel had her recorder hidden in a clutch, her eyes darting around the ballroom. She wore no perfume. Her presence was efficient and quiet like a blade. "You sure about this?" she whispered, voice low enough that only I could hear. Her breath smelled faintly of coffee and mint. "I've never been more sure of anything," I replied. My heart thudded against my ribs, loud enough to drown out the orchestra playing in the corner. Every ounce of me wanted to run, to hide, to call it off. But the memory of that morning, the cameras, his smirk, the way the room had turned on me, steadied my hands. Langford took the stage to accept Leadership of the Year. Applause rose like a wave. He raised his glass, eyes gleaming. The PR team dimmed the lights and cued the slideshow celebrating his vision. My throat tightened as the first images rolled. Smiling clients, contract signings, stock charts, all staged to perfection. Rachel nudged me. Now. I stood, heart in my mouth, and walked toward the small service door that led up to the AV booth. The corridor smelled of stage varnish and the sweet tang of spilled wine. I tapped the code Evan had given me. A maintenance override, and the door clicked open. For a second I felt like a thief. Then I remembered what he'd stolen from me. Inside the dim booth, wires hung like vines. Screens blinked with control panels. I plugged Evan's USB into the main console. Hands steady despite the blood roaring in my ears. The file names were obvious. Invoices, vendors, shell companies. Zip. I watched as the terminal parsed them, each line a thread in his web. On the gala's main screen, the slideshow stuttered, and then, like a bruise blooming, the curated images were replaced by raw documents. Scanned invoices with unfamiliar vendor names, transaction logs, and then the kicker. An internal spreadsheet with Langford's electronic signature approving payments to shell accounts. Gasps fluttered through the ballroom like trapped birds. Back in the crowd, I felt the temperature drop. Conversations halted mid-sentence. The orchestra's melody warped into silence. People turned toward the screens, confusion curling into disbelief, then into a low, dangerous murmur. Langford's smile froze. For a moment he looked like a man who'd been interrupted mid-theft. His hand tightened around the microphone. "What?" he said, voice wavering. From the booth, Rachel's voice cut through the stunned hush, calm and precise. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Rachel Kim with the Tribune. We have verified documents showing misappropriation of funds and falsified contracts at Langford Dynamics. We are publishing everything." Panic unfurled across Langford's face. He tried to recover, cleaving to rehearsed rhetoric. "This is a smear, an attack fabricated." Someone in the front row shouted, "Show proof." The screen obliged, displaying an email chain. Langford instructing an assistant to adjust numbers. A wire transfer receipt to an address in an offshore shell company. A vendor contract with no physical address. Each piece landed like a pebble into a still pond, ripples reaching every corner of the room. Mini cliffhanger, would he admit it? He didn't. Instead he stammered and accused. But his words were thin paper against the rain of documents. Board members squeezed one another's hands. Investors' eyes narrowed into knives. Phones came out. Reporters sprinted. Security glanced toward the stage, uncertain. The most satisfying moment was not the gasps, but the change in his posture, that slow deflation. The man who'd stood over me in the boardroom now looked small and exposed under the chandelier's harsh light. The power in his voice cracked, and for the first time the room didn't follow him. I sat down, breathing shallow as staffers moved to cut the feed. But before they could, someone from legal, a woman I'd once helped with a complicated projection, stood and said, "We need an independent audit." Her voice carried authority. Heads nodded. The word audit landed like a verdict. Mini cliffhanger. Would the board act or cover it? Langford lashed out, accusing me by name in a voice that trembled. "This is the work of a disgruntled former employee, Hadley." He aimed that old, cruel smirk at me. The room's attention snapped to me like a camera lens. For a heartbeat I saw the old fear rise in my chest. Then I remembered the nights of data, the backup files, Evan's trembling confession, Rachel's steady presence. Rachel stood, microphone in hand, and said, "We published the documents after thorough verification. Miss Hadley brought this to light." Her hand brushed mine as she passed the mic. The touch was brief, but it felt like an exhale. Langford's composure unraveled. He asked for time to respond. The board demanded an immediate review. Outside, police cars slowed as breaking news alerts began to vibrate across the city. Cameras swarmed like bees. Later, when I walked home under a sky so clear it felt like an accusation, I realized the act of revenge hadn't been a scream of fury. It had been a carefully placed mirror showing him to everyone he'd lied to. Poetic justice doesn't always burn things to the ground. Sometimes it simply turns the lights on. That night, I slept for the first time in weeks without waking in a cold sweat. The battle wasn't finished. Legal processes would take their course, but the scales had tipped. In the quiet, Milo patted onto my chest and purred. I stroked his fur and allowed myself a small, private victory. The words I'd whispered earlier felt true now. This was justice. This was office revenge, precise, necessary, and ultimately human. The morning after the gala, the world felt eerily calm. The kind of silence that comes before a storm finishes what it started. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Dozens of missed calls, hundreds of unread messages. I didn't answer any of them. I sat on my couch with a blanket wrapped around me, Milo asleep on my lap, watching the headlines scroll across the TV. Langford Dynamics CEO under investigation for fraud. Insider leaks reveal massive embezzlement scheme. Former employee exposes corporate corruption. Each headline carried a piece of the truth, my truth, but none of them told the whole story. The media painted me as a whistleblower, a brave insider, a woman wronged and redeemed. They didn't see the sleepless nights, the shaking hands, the fear that lived in my chest like a heartbeat. They didn't see how close I'd come to giving up. I turned off the TV. The silence returned. For a long time I just listened, to the hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the clock, the faint rhythm of Milo's breathing. It felt strange to exist without adrenaline, without strategy. For months my life had been a storm of tension and purpose. Now it was quiet. At noon there was a knock on my door. When I opened it, Evan stood there. He looked thinner, paler, but his eyes were clearer than I'd ever seen them. In his hands he held a folder, the final audit from an independent firm. "It's done," he said softly. "The board confirmed everything. They're cooperating with the investigation. Langford's frozen out." I let him in. We sat at the kitchen table like two survivors who just crawled out of the same wreckage. He handed me the folder, but I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I could read the relief in his posture. "He's going to face charges," Evan continued. "Fraud, money laundering, obstruction. He's finished." I stared out the window. A light rain was falling, thin silver threads tracing down the glass. "I thought I'd feel happier," I said quietly. Evan nodded. "Justice doesn't always feel like joy. Sometimes it's just stillness." We sat there in that stillness, the kind that isn't empty but earned. I thought about all the people who'd been affected. Employees laid off because of his greed, clients deceived, reputations ruined. It wasn't just revenge. It was restoration. A few days later, I was called to a board meeting, this time not as a scapegoat but as a witness. The same conference room. The same polished table. The same scent of stale coffee and ambition. But everything was different. Langford wasn't there. In his place sat an empty chair, symbolic, haunting, poetic. His portrait had been taken down from the wall. In its place, a simple company slogan: "Integrity first." The chairman cleared his throat. "Miss Hadley, we owe you an apology," he said, voice heavy with the kind of regret that can't be scripted. "What happened to you was unacceptable. We failed you and this company. If you're open to it, we'd like to offer you your position back. Or any role you choose." For a moment the air thickened. I could feel every pair of eyes on me, waiting, hoping, curious. I took a slow breath and said, "I appreciate that. But I'm not coming back." Whispers rustled around the table. The chairman blinked. "May I ask why?" I smiled gently. "Because I didn't do this to get my job back. I did it to make sure no one else ever has to lose theirs the way I did." Rachel published a follow-up story that week, one that told everything the headlines missed. She didn't paint me as a hero or a victim, just as a woman who decided to stop being silent. The article went viral. The comment section was filled with strangers thanking me for speaking up, for showing that corruption can be challenged. And yet, the most powerful message I received wasn't online. It was a handwritten note that arrived in the mail 2 weeks later. No return address. Just a single line. "Because of you, I found the courage to stand up to my own boss." I read that line over and over until the ink began to blur. That was the moment I realized my revenge had turned into something bigger. A ripple that stretched beyond the walls of Langford Dynamics. Some nights I still dream of the boardroom, the glare of the lights, the sound of my name being called, the shame that used to burn my skin. But now when I wake it's different. The fear is gone. What remains is a quiet strength, a voice that whispers, "You took back your power." As I closed the curtains that evening, the city outside glowed with life. Horns, laughter, the rhythm of people moving forward. I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not triumph, not revenge, but peace. And peace, I realized, was the truest consequence of all. I used to believe revenge was about victory, about seeing the person who hurt you fall, about reclaiming what was stolen. But standing here now, months after everything unraveled, I've learned that true office revenge isn't destruction, it's transformation. Life eventually quieted down. The storm faded and I found myself walking different streets, breathing freer air. I'd left the corporate world for good and started consulting for small startups, companies built by honest people who just wanted to create something meaningful. Every time I sat with a new founder, every time I saw genuine passion instead of greed, I felt like I was rebuilding something inside myself. Some nights I'd still think about Langford, not with anger anymore, but with a strange, detached compassion. Last I heard, he'd been stripped of his titles, charged, and facing years of legal battles. The empire he built on deception had crumbled, not because I destroyed it, but because truth did. There's a certain poetry in that, isn't there? The same truth he used to manipulate others became the sword that cut him down. One morning I visited the old office building. It had been months, but the glass facade still gleamed under the winter sun. I stood outside holding a cup of coffee, watching the reflection of people rushing in and out. Fresh faces, new dreams. No one recognized me, and I liked it that way. I thought about that day in the boardroom, how my voice had trembled, how my confidence had shattered. For so long I believed that was the moment I lost everything. But standing there I realized, it was the moment I found myself. Without that humiliation, I might never have discovered my strength. Without that betrayal, I might never have learned what integrity truly costs, or how powerful it feels to live without fear. I smiled, whispered a quiet goodbye to the past, and walked away. Later that week, Rachel invited me to a podcast, Stories of Courage. I almost said no, but something inside told me this story wasn't just mine anymore. So I sat in that studio under soft lights with the microphone inches from my lips, and I told everything. Not for revenge, not for fame, but for every person who's ever been silenced in an office, humiliated in a meeting, or forced to choose between their dignity and their paycheck. At the end of the recording, Rachel asked, "If you could say one thing to the people watching, the ones who feel powerless right now, what would it be?" I paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. Then I said, "Power doesn't come from position. It comes from truth. You don't have to fight dirty to win. Sometimes the most powerful revenge is simply living your life with integrity, while their lies collapse on their own." The episode went viral within hours. Messages poured in from around the world, from secretaries, interns, even managers, people who'd faced betrayal, manipulation, and injustice. They said my story gave them courage, that they, too, wanted to fight back, not with hatred but with honesty. I realized then, revenge wasn't about destroying someone's world. It was about rebuilding yours. Now, whenever I share my story, I make sure to end it the same way, not with bitterness but with truth. Because the truth is, revenge never gave me peace. Forgiveness did. But not the kind of forgiveness that excuses wrongdoing. The kind that frees me from it. As the camera fades to black and the soft music begins, my voice narrates the closing lines. Words that have become both a reflection and a promise. Sometimes, life will strip you down to nothing, so you can rebuild yourself into something unbreakable. I was humiliated once, but I rose again. Not to prove him wrong, but to prove myself right. If you've ever been betrayed, if someone ever tried to silence your voice, remember, you're not alone. Broken heart, like this video if you've ever fought your own silent battle. Speech balloon, share your story in the comments. Someone out there might need to hear it. Bell and subscribe for more stories like this. Stories about truth, courage, and justice that begins where fear ends. Because sometimes the sweetest office revenge is living free.